The Man Behind the Tree. This story happened about 10 years ago when I was 10 years old. It's a story that still frightens me to this day. I was walking through the park on my way back from school. I was on a path I took every day with my large overstuffed backpack. The big bag was heavy and made me hunch. I found it awkward and that made me a little embarrassed. Being a shy child, I hated crowds. I hated feeling embarrassed in front of crowds. So whenever I got a chance, I avoided them. The park was the quickest way home, and I normally had a choice between two different paths when I got there. One path took me straight home and was about 20 minutes shorter, but there were so many people, so I always took the second one. It was the long way home, but it was quiet and usually empty. However, today was different. I was not alone. It was halfway through my trip when I needed a breather, so I put my hefty backpack on the ground and had a little stretch. I jumped in place for a minute, yawning as I did so. Just then I heard something behind me like crunching leaves. I froze, not knowing really what to do. The sound grew nearer, louder. For a moment I decided I had to move, so I slowly turned around. I could see part of a dark figure behind a tree to my right, moving slowly. It looked like someone was intentionally sneaking. I started to sweat and visibly shivered. The figure must have noticed me staring because all of a sudden the stranger froze as well. The figure, a man, I was positive then that it looked like he was dressed in mostly all black. I think he was wearing a jogging outfit with double white stripes along the arms and pants, but as far as I could tell from the shape he was in, it didn't look like he ran much, if ever. He was clearly overweight, with a big belly sticking out from behind a tree. I could hear his heavy breaths. "Sir," I said. My voice squeaked and stuttered. I don't want any trouble. I'm just walking through the park." Just then I caught sight of my backpack and slowly sidestepped towards it. The figure noticed this and started sprinting, more like shuffling, in my direction. I tossed my bag in response and hauled my little behind in the direction away from home. People. I knew people would mean my safety. I had to make it to them. My backpack bounced against my back like an oversized paddle ball. It hurt so much, though I didn't have time to think about it. But the pain was still there, intensifying with each step. I'm sure it left a bruise each time it struck against my tiny back. I looked backward for a second and noticed the man behind me, too close in fact. He reached for me with one gloved hand. I could almost feel the leathery material on the back of my neck. However, that didn't concern me as much as it did hearing his breathing. It was so loud. I had no idea what was keeping him going. He had to be exhausted because I knew I was nearing my limits. I needed to lose my pursuer, so I decided to try something different. I turned off the dirt path and into the woods. My backpack struck a tree limb, making a terrible cracking sound. I dodged to and fro between the trees. The sounds of footsteps lessened behind me, and I took it as a good sign, but I couldn't quit just yet. The woods grew thicker. I could hardly see 2 feet in front of me. Had God Almighty put a cliff down before me, I would have run straight off. Just then, I heard voices up ahead, many voices, but I couldn't see who they belonged to because of the vegetation in the way. Bushes, scrub trees, and thorny thickets stood between me and safety. "You're not getting through that, kid," a gruff voice said behind me. "Just follow me. I'll get you out of here." I dared not listen to the lies. Instead, I scrambled up a bush, scratching and bruising my sleeveless arms and legs. The woody plant was larger than I wished. My legs sunk into the shrub. I squirmed and kicked. My arms dangled in front of me. Safety was so close I could see it. A person stood a dozen feet away from me. It was a child, someone I knew from school. I tried to yell, but I was out of breath. I prayed to God to let me live. I promised I'd be a good boy forever and ever if he'd just let me get away. Suddenly, I felt an immense pressure around my leg. It hurt so much I groaned. I looked back. The man was pulling me backward. I wiggled up and down and kicked with my other foot. One hit struck the stranger's hand and he let go with an audible moan. I think he might have cursed too. Either way, I finally managed to sound. "Help," I said, "help." I jumped back on top of the bush and yelled with everything I had, "Help me!" Almost immediately I heard voices coming my way, and adult jeeps emerged from the path before me. Many adults rushed forward. Most looked concerned, a few looked angry. A crowd formed quickly. "What's going on?" one man asked. I grew anxious as I made my way over the bush and fell into the dirt path. I looked dirty and bloody. I couldn't speak. Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to tell them everything, but I was so overwhelmed with emotion and exhaustion. A familiar woman appeared from the crowd and told the others to back away. A little smile grew on my face as I started, breathlessly, to explain the situation. As soon as I got to the stranger lurking behind a tree, 3 groups of men formed and started searching the woods. The teacher took me home and told my parents the story. My mom hugged me for what seemed like forever, and my dad wanted to go out and join the forming posses, but my mom begged him to stay. We thanked the teacher and she went on her way. I had a bath and a big dinner. Later that night, I repeated my tale to a police officer. I described the man as best I could, but to this day, he's never been caught. He eluded the angry crowds and the police that day, and no one reported anything similar happened in that park since. So, life went on. I survived. Well, I guess that's that. My story is finished. Actually, I need to add this final thought. Oh, stranger, if you're still out there and you're reading this, I want you to know one thing. I grew up, and I'm a lot bigger now. Let's not meet again, or else. The Screaming Lady. About 2 years ago, when I was 16, I was waiting at an empty bus stop around 10 p.m. I had my headphones on, listening to music on my phone, when a strange woman walked up to me. I'd say she was homeless, at least it appeared that way. The salt and pepper hair, looking more like a mop than hair, on her head masked her eyes. Wrinkles covered her sunburned face and arms, and the baggy rags she used for clothing sagged around her bony arms and toes, which stuck out from under her pants. A large straw handbag hung around the elbow of her right arm, dangling as she bounced up and down in front of me. Suddenly, she moved her cracked lips. I assumed she was talking to me because my headphones were super loud. I couldn't hear her, so I lifted my headphones away from my ears. Suddenly, I heard the woman screaming, so I jumped back. It wasn't just because she was loud. I jumped back because she was screaming my name. I didn't know who this lady was, but apparently she knew me. I quickly composed myself and tried asking her what she wanted, but she wouldn't answer. She just kept screaming my name. With this going on, I slowly backed up. I quickly glanced to the left and noticed my bus rounding the corner. I tried telling the lady that the bus was almost here, but she didn't seem to listen. Instead, she reached to her handbag with her left hand. She stopped screaming just then, and swiftly, she pulled out a rusty silver box cutter. Stains, I assumed dry blood, covered the tip of the blade. I gulped at the sight of it. I sidestepped to the left and told her I didn't have any money, which was a lie, but I hoped she didn't know that. The bus came to a stop, and the doors hissed open. I lifted my hands up while backing up towards the bus. The driver didn't notice me. She was busy staring down at her phone. Holding my hands out in front of me like a shield, I backed my way onto the bus. I took each step carefully, never taking my eyes off the ragged woman. She waved the box cutter slowly at me, licking her lips as she did. I moved slowly to the right into a nearby seat and yelled at the driver that she should leave. The driver gave me a look. I saw anger on her face, but I didn't care. I wanted to get out of there. Turning my attention back to the woman outside, I now noticed she stood beside my window. I jumped at her proximity and bent my body away from her in my seat. Then she tapped the glass with the box cutter. I could just barely see it. Taking a deep breath, I sat up slowly and noticed the lady was talking again. Even with the loud sound of the bus's engine, the night sounds of the city, and the metal between us, I listened to what she said, and I was terrified. The lady screamed my address and my name for a final time, and laughed just as the doors closed. The bus hissed and crawled away from the screaming lady. I shivered, watching as the bus left her behind. She hurried down the street, box cutter in hand, and disappeared behind a corner. I took a deep breath and slouched to my seat for a minute. Then I remembered my phone and sent my parents a text message or two concerning the woman. I received a warm welcome when I got home, and they warned me against using that bus stop in the future. I told them I'd never use it again, which was true. My dad didn't bother calling the police, even if it appeared that she knew my address. He was confident she wouldn't show up. She never did. Now 2 years later, I can't shake her image. I can't stop seeing the blade every time I close my eyes. I constantly dream of her standing in the doorway, box cutter in hand, and part of a head sticking out of her straw handbag, dripping blood onto the floor. I try to shake those kind of thoughts off. I've even had counseling to deal with it, but her memory is still with me. I feel like I can hear the screaming lady outside my window while sitting here in my dorm room. I'm writing this all down because they say it'll help me get over it. I hope this helps. I need to catch a bus in a little bit. Under the bed. One event in my life frightened me almost out of my mind. I remember it very well. I get chills just thinking about it as I write this down. As a young girl, still but only a child, I had awful nightmares about shadowy beings under my bed. I'd wake up sweating and shaking from a dark dream with powerful need to use the bathroom. But I still feared having to go late at night, because I assumed the creatures of my dreams were down there still, and that they were patient. I knew as soon as I touched the floor they'd grab my little feet with their dark reptilian claws. I imagined slamming face first into the ground where their scaly fingers would grab my slender frame. Quickly they'd pull me down by my waist-length hair and pajamas into the nothingness under the bed and rip me to shreds. so I'd wait there until morning and pray. Normally, the feeling of having to use the bathroom went away and I'd drift back into a deep sleep. Yet oftentimes the next morning I would feel awful because my covers were damp from sweat and urine. It shamed me to shuffle into my mother's room after those nights. I'd see a concerning look on her face as she walked over to my room and assessed the damage. She was a very patient, petite woman, but she was also tough, taking care of her only daughter by herself. I didn't know my father, and I still don't. It was just my mother and I living out in the country when the event that scares me even to this day occurred. It was near the end of summer, and I dreaded the idea that school would start up again in a week. I enjoyed and just gotten used to the freedom that came with the summertime season. I hung out with friends, both boys and girls, all day long. Sometimes we'd go swimming, or go out into the woods playing war, or made up games, or just went to each other's homes and dressed up. We did almost whatever we wanted. The time was ours to do with what we wished. I loved everything about those days. I joked, laughed, and smiled. The daylight hours were fantastic. However, those didn't last forever. Eventually, nighttime would rear its ugly head over the trees. The sun would climb down from its perch in the sky, and the moon would creep up into its place. I'd be home by then, or 2 minutes away from home at the very least. And on this night, I was only a minute away from home. I left my best friend's place about 10 minutes earlier and dashed down the left shoulder of the road, with my little feet hurrying across the pavement. Passers-by drove slowly around me. I recognized some of them as my neighbors and waved at them. Most of them waved back, smiling as they did so. As I reached my front door, I noticed one car, a blue Ford truck, creeping into my driveway. The headlights blinded me. I know it wasn't my mother's car because she drove a smart car and it was already parked in the driveway. I held up my hands, trying to shield my eyes. Squinting, I could see a shape of a figure behind the wheel, though I couldn't make out any distinguishing features. I assumed it was a relative or a friend of my mother's that I didn't know was dropping by, so I waved. The person didn't respond. I could hear my mother walking towards the door. Just then the truck backed up slowly and drove away. I shrugged, thinking the driver had just made a wrong turn and needed to turn around. My mother opened the door and with a warm smile asked if I was ready for dinner. I nodded happily and hurried into the bathroom to wash my hands. I forgot all about the truck. A minute later I took my seat in the kitchen. A big plate of spaghetti sat on the table in front of me. Closing her eyes, my mother bent her head down and clasped her hands together. I did the same. It was prayer time. I don't do that much nowadays. I don't think it helps much, but now that I do think of it, maybe it did help that night. I don't know. I started fidgeting and noticing that my mom ended the prayer quickly. She smiled at me and I did the same. Then my mom gave me the signal to dig in. We dug in. I gulped down the meal hungrily, leaving only a puddle of red sauce on the plastic plate. After cleaning up our mess, my mother and I moved into the living room. She turned on the TV and flipped to a program with semi-celebrities competing in some dance competition. I took little notice of it. I was glancing down at my tablet, scouring the web for scary stories. I was really into horror fiction, even if it caused me to have terrible nightmares. A couple hours later, it was time for bed. I showered quickly, changed into my pajamas, and jumped into bed. My mom visited me shortly afterward and tucked me in with a kiss on my forehead. I loved that. She put her hand on my arm and turned on a little LED lamp that sat on a nightstand beside my bed. She told me good night and got up. A look of embarrassment appeared on my face as I asked her to check under my bed. She shook her head slowly, saying that she wouldn't tonight and probably never again. My face went flush with anger and then, after a moment, fear. I know she wanted me to grow up, but I didn't feel like tonight was the night to start. She let me know she loved me and gave me a little wave, but I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. After a moment, she nodded and hit the switch on the wall. Instantly, the light on the ceiling turned off. The room was dark, even with my little nightlight. Shadows and darkness covered the corners of my bedroom. I strained to see the boy band posters that covered my walls. It was too dark. Turning onto my side, I pulled my knees up to my chest and tossed the sheets over my head. I closed my eyes, and after a long moment, I dreamed. A sound awoke me. My eyes darted around the room in every direction. I don't know how long I had slept, but it wasn't long enough. The darkness outside my bedroom window gave me that knowledge. I turned to my nightstand, where my lamp and small digital alarm clock sat. It was almost midnight. Suddenly I heard a noise. I couldn't place it, but I was positive it was coming from inside my room. I dared not think about where. The possibilities were terrifying. Then I heard it again. It sounded like something was scratching something wooden beneath me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and my bed started to shake. A shadow to my right rose into my periphery. It stretched out across my window. I knew the shadow was real and something was making it. I squinted and noticed something dark land on my bed. I scooted away from whatever it was, hopping like a bunny on my bum across the bed sheets. Another dark object came into view near the first, another claw searching for me. In that instant, I had a terrifying thought that the monsters were finally making their move. Breathlessly, I fell off the bed and hit the floor with a thud. Something heavy struck against my chest. I yelped and crawled away quickly, towards my bedroom door. I heard a grunt behind me. The bed still shook, now bouncing a bit more on the opposite side. Reaching the exit, I put one hand on my doorknob. I glanced back. A dark, hulking figure arose. With a second wind, I screamed again and turned the doorknob. I threw it open and I jumped at the sight of my mother, with her silky nightgown on the other side. She had an aluminum bat in her hands and a terrified look on her face. I jumped at her, grabbing her waist tightly. Her face went red as she noticed the figure in my room. I saw her truly angry for the first time. Shoving me away softly with her free hand, my mother told me to call the police. I remembered the 3 digits I needed to make the call and hurried to her phone, which was charging in her room. I heard my mom struggling behind me. She roared, making sounds I had never heard before or since. The bat dinged with each hit. Glass shattered and my mom ran out of the room. Her dark hair danced around her head, and her short nightgown bounced against her equally short but powerful legs as she ran through the hall toward the living room, still carrying the bat, even though it looked quite bent. Quickly I followed my mom down the hall just as a voice on the phone called out. It was the emergency operator. I told her someone had been in my room and my mom was beating the crud out of them. The operator let me know to stay on the line and wait for the police. They would be there shortly. I reached the front door. There was no sign of my mother. I peered into the darkness. I waited on the front porch for a bit. Suddenly, a familiar sound caught my attention. A truck roared down the street, and a moment later, I heard my mother. She hobbled over to me, panting and sweating. I asked her what happened, but she couldn't talk. She took a seat at the top of the porch steps and breathed deeply. After a moment, she asked if the cops were coming, and I nodded. Then I asked her if everything was okay. She said everything would be fine. I took a seat beside her, and she grabbed me, hugging me tightly. Tears ran down our cheeks as we just sat there for a while. Eventually, a police car arrived. 2 officers stepped out and asked us about the situation. We answered, and I told them about the truck I saw earlier this evening. They called for backup and searched the surrounding area. They found nothing. The truck was never spotted either. The police took down our reports, and we stayed the night at a friend's house. I slept with my mother. It was the only time I remembered we shared a bed together. It was the safest I ever felt. After that night, we moved away. I never saw my friends again, and I still had awful dreams. I never found out how the creeper got in, or what he planned to do to me. All I know is that I'm safe today because of my mom. I thank her every day.